Imagine arresting someone who seems like just another ordinary suspect, until you realize they're far from it. In a quiet town, two cops make a decision that will haunt them within minutes. What happens when the truth about this old man turns everything upside down? And why does the arrival of the FBI change not only their lives but also how we see justice itself? The sun hung low over the quiet suburban streets of Maplewood, casting long shadows across the pavement. It was a town where nothing much ever happened, just the occasional noise complaint or misplaced pet report. But today, something unusual stirred beneath its calm surface. Harry Benson shuffled along Main Street, his gait slow but deliberate. At 72, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place among the hurried shoppers and buzzing neon signs. His weathered coat hung loosely on his frame, patched at the elbows and faded from years of use. A cap shaded his face, though not enough to hide the deep lines etched into his skin, lines earned through decades of hardship, service, and survival. He paused outside a small convenience store, glancing around as if searching for something or someone. Inside the store, officers Matthew Riggs and Bernie Cole leaned casually against the counter, sipping coffee provided by the grateful shopkeeper. They weren't exactly busy today. Their primary task had been breaking up an argument between two teens over a stolen skateboard. Still, they liked to keep visible, letting the townsfolk know they were present. Their radios crackled intermittently, filling the silence with bursts of static and distant dispatch chatter. "Hey, check this out," Bernie said suddenly, pointing toward the window. Outside, Harry stood motionless, staring intently at the storefront display. Something about his posture felt off, not menacing but calculated. Matthew squinted, scratching his stubble jaw. "What's he doing? Just standing there?" Bernie shrugged, setting down his cup. "Dunno. Let's find out." They stepped outside, boots clicking against the sidewalk as they approached him. Up close, Harry looked older than either officer had initially thought. His hands rested lightly in his pockets, and his expression remained neutral, almost serene. For a moment, neither man spoke. They simply studied him, sizing him up. "You lost, buddy?" Matthew asked finally, his tone clipped but not unkind. Harry turned to face them, tilting his head slightly. "No, son. I'm right where I need to be." His voice was steady, with a faint gravelly edge that hinted at years spent shouting over gunfire and roaring engines. The officers exchanged skeptical glances. There was something unsettling about the way he spoke, not aggressive but confident, as if he knew more than he let on. "Well, mind telling us what you're doing here?" Bernie pressed, folding his arms across his chest. "You've been standing here for 10 minutes. Harry hesitated, his gaze flickering briefly toward the store before returning to the officers. "Just observing," he replied evenly. "It's important." "Observing what?" Matthew demanded, growing impatient. "This ain't some spy movie, old-timer. Either tell us why you're loitering, or move along." A flicker of amusement passed over Harry's face, gone so quickly it might have been imagined. "If only it were that simple," he murmured under his breath. "What did you say?" Bernie snapped, stepping closer. "Look, we don't have time for games. You causing trouble, or what?" Harry sighed softly, shaking his head. "No trouble. Just watching." But the officers weren't convinced. To them, Harry fit the profile perfectly. An elderly man, unkempt and alone, hanging around outside a business without explanation. When they noticed him reaching into his coat pocket, their instincts kicked in. "Hands where we can see 'em," Matthew barked, hand moving instinctively to his holster. Harry froze, then slowly withdrew his hand, revealing nothing more than a crumpled receipt. "Relax, boys," he said calmly. "I'm not armed." Bernie snatched the paper from his fingers, scanning it quickly. "What's this? Proof of purchase for a pack of gum? Real suspicious stuff, huh?" "It's not about the gum," Harry replied cryptically, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You'll understand soon enough." That was the last straw. Between his evasive answers and odd behavior, the officers decided they'd seen enough. With little ceremony, They cuffed Harry and escorted him to the squad car, ignoring his protests. As they shoved him into the back seat, Matthew muttered, "Another day, another nut job." At the station, they dumped Harry's belongings onto the table during booking. A wallet containing a few dollars, a photograph of a young woman in military fatigues, and a tarnished silver badge tucked into the lining of his coat. Bernie picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "What's this supposed to be? Some kind of joke?" he scoffed, holding it up for Matthew to see. The badge bore no insignia they recognized, just a series of numbers and a phone number engraved on the back. Harry watched silently, his expression unreadable. "Probably fake," Matthew dismissed, tossing it aside. "Let's get him processed." Neither officer noticed the uneasy feeling creeping into the room, a sense that they were missing something crucial. Little did they know, their dismissal of Harry Benson would unravel far faster than they could have anticipated. The fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the small interrogation room. Harry sat quietly in the corner, his cuffed hands resting on the table in front of him. He didn't fidget or protest. Instead, he exuded a calm detachment, as though he were merely observing the chaos around him rather than being at its center. Officers Matthew Riggs and Bernie Cole stood outside the room, peering through the two-way mirror. "Well, that was anticlimactic," Bernie muttered, leaning against the wall with a smirk. "Guy's either nuts or just really bad at playing innocent." Matthew shrugged, folding his arms across his chest. "Either way, we'll hold him until someone claims him or he gives us a straight answer. Doesn't matter to me." But something about the situation gnawed at Matthew, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Maybe it was the way Harry carried himself, too composed for someone who'd been accused of theft. Or maybe it was the cryptic things he'd said back at the store. Whatever it was, Matthew pushed it aside, chalking it up to overthinking. Inside the room, Harry remained still, his gaze fixed on the reflection of the officers in the glass. Though they couldn't see him clearly, he studied them intently, as if memorizing every detail. His expression betrayed no emotion, but there was a subtle tension in the set of his jaw, a quiet anticipation, like a storm waiting to break. Bernie glanced down at the items recovered from Harry's coat, which had been laid out on a nearby desk. The wallet, the photograph, and the mysterious badge caught his eye again. Picking up the badge, he turned it over in his hand, inspecting the engraving more closely. "Hey, Matt," Bernie said, holding it up. "You think this number is legit? Could be worth checking out." Matthew frowned, walking over to take a closer look. "Probably nothing. But yeah, might as well humor you. Can't hurt to call." He grabbed the phone on the desk and dialed the number etched into the metal. As the line rang, both officers exchanged skeptical looks, expecting to reach some random answering service or disconnected number. Instead, after only 3 rings, a crisp, authoritative voice answered. "This is Agent Monroe, Identification Division, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Matthew froze, the receiver halfway to his ear. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard. Clearing his throat, he stammered, "Hi. This is Officer Matthew Riggs with the Maplewood Police Department. We, found this badge on a suspect. Just wanted to verify its authenticity." There was a brief pause on the other end before Agent Monroe responded, her tone sharp and urgent. "Repeat the ID number engraved on the badge." Matthew read it aloud, glancing at Bernie, whose eyebrows shot up in disbelief. Another pause followed, longer this time, and when Agent Monroe spoke again, her voice carried an edge of alarm. "That badge belongs to Harold Benson, a high-ranking operative currently embedded in a classified mission under federal jurisdiction." "Where is he now?" Matthew's heart skipped a beat. "He's here, in custody, at our station." Agent Monroe's response was immediate and commanding. "Do not move. Do not question him further. A team is en route to your location. We will be there in 30 minutes. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Matthew replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He hung up the phone slowly, turning to face Bernie, whose mouth hung open in shock. "What the hell did we just get ourselves into?" Bernie whispered hoarsely. Before either could process what had happened, the atmosphere in the station shifted dramatically. Officers milling about stopped mid-conversation, sensing the tension radiating from Matthew and Bernie. The air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken urgency. Back in the interrogation room, Harry sat unmoved, seemingly oblivious to the escalating panic outside. Yet there was a faint glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes, as though he'd known exactly how this would unfold all along. 30 minutes later, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the station as a group of impeccably dressed FBI agents swept in, their presence commanding instant attention. Leading the charge was a tall woman with sharp features and piercing eyes, Agent Monroe herself. She strode directly toward Matthew and Bernie, her expression unreadable but intimidating. "Where is he?" she demanded without preamble. Matthew gestured weakly toward the interrogation room. "In there." "We didn't know." Agent Monroe cut him off with a curt nod, brushing past them without another word. Her team followed closely behind, surrounding the door like a protective shield. When she entered the room, Harry finally stirred, rising slowly to his feet. "Agent Monroe," he greeted her, his voice calm and measured. "I assume the timing worked in our favor?" "It did," she confirmed, her tone softening slightly as she approached him. "Your cover remains intact, Mr. Benson. My apologies for the inconvenience." Harry nodded, accepting the apology with a small smile. "No harm done. Sometimes these things are necessary." As Agent Monroe began unlocking his cuffs, the rest of the team moved efficiently, gathering Harry's belongings and ensuring his comfort. Meanwhile, Matthew and Bernie lingered awkwardly outside, watching the scene unfold with mounting dread. They had gone from confident law enforcement officers to spectators in their own station, utterly humiliated by their ignorance. When Agent Monroe emerged from the room, she fixed the two officers with a steely glare. "You will receive a full debriefing regarding this incident. Suffice it to say, Mr. Benson is operating under direct orders from the highest levels of government. Any interference with his activities constitutes a breach of national security. Consider yourselves fortunate that your actions did not compromise his mission, or worse." Matthew swallowed hard, his face burning with shame. "We didn't know. He wasn't forthcoming and you assumed." Agent Monroe interrupted sharply. "That's the problem. Assumptions cost lives. Remember that." With that, she turned on her heel, escorting Harry out of the station. The entire ordeal lasted less than 10 minutes, but it left an indelible mark on everyone present. As the door closed behind them, the station fell silent, the weight of the moment settling heavily on Matthew and Bernie's shoulders. Bernie broke the silence first, his voice trembling. "Did we just arrest a spy or something?" Matthew shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what we arrested, but I do know one thing: we screwed up big time." The hum of quiet tension filled the station long after the FBI agents and Harry Benson had departed. Officers who had once moved about with casual ease now tiptoed around, avoiding eye contact with Matthew Riggs and Bernie Cole. The two men sat slumped at their desks, staring blankly at the paperwork scattered in front of them. Neither spoke, neither needed to. Their shared guilt hung heavy in the air like a storm cloud refusing to break. Bernie finally broke the silence, his voice low and strained. "So, what do we even say? Sorry for arresting a national hero?" Matthew rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "We don't say anything. What can we say? It's not like an apology fixes this." But it wasn't just the arrest that gnawed at them, it was everything leading up to it. The dismissive glances, the snide comments, the way they treated Harry as if he were nothing more than a nuisance. They hadn't seen him as a person, let alone someone whose life might matter on a scale far beyond their comprehension. And now, the truth loomed over them like a towering wave threatening to crash down. Their thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Agent Monroe, who returned unexpectedly half an hour later. This time, she wasn't accompanied by her team or Harry. Instead, she carried a thick file folder tucked under one arm, her expression unreadable as she strode toward them. "Gentlemen," She began without preamble, dropping the folder onto the desk between them. You have questions. I'm here to provide answers, but only because Mr. Benson requested it. Matthew blinked, surprised. He requested this? Agent Monroe nodded curtly. Mr. Benson believes understanding is key to preventing future mistakes. Consider yourselves fortunate he's willing to extend such grace. She opened the folder, revealing a series of documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. At first glance, the contents seemed ordinary enough. Military records, commendations, mission briefs. But as the officers flipped through them, the magnitude of what they were seeing began to sink in. There was Harry, decades younger, standing proudly in full military regalia beside fellow soldiers. There he was again, crouched in the rubble of a war-torn village, helping carry survivors to safety. Another photo showed him receiving a medal from a high-ranking official, though the exact nature of the award was redacted. Each image told a story of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication. This, Bernie trailed off, his voice barely above a whisper. This can't be real. It's very real. Agent Monroe replied sharply. Harold Benson has served his country in ways most people couldn't fathom. Classified missions, covert operations, intelligence work, all while operating under aliases and maintaining complete anonymity. His service record spans 40 years, during which he saved countless lives and dismantled some of the world's most dangerous threats. Yet you dismissed him as a vagrant. Her words cut deep, striking a nerve neither man could ignore. Matthew leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of her accusation settle over him like a lead blanket. He looked down at the photograph of Harry accepting the medal, his mind racing with questions. But why would someone like him still be working undercover? Matthew asked hesitantly. I mean, shouldn't he be retired by now? Agent Monroe's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze hardening. That's classified. But suffice it to say, Mr. Benson's skills are unparalleled. When duty calls, he answers regardless of personal cost. Bernie frowned, flipping through another page of the file. And the thing at the store? Was that part of his mission? Yes, Agent Monroe confirmed. Though the specifics are none of your concern. Suffice it to say, his actions were deliberate and necessary. Your interference could have jeopardized months, or even years, of careful planning. The room fell silent again as the officers absorbed the gravity of her words. Every assumption they'd made about Harry had been wrong. Every judgment, every harsh word, they all felt like punches to the gut now. Matthew exhaled shakily, running a hand over his face. We didn't know. How could we have known? That's precisely the point, Agent Monroe said, her tone softening slightly but retaining its edge. You didn't take the time to find out. You saw an old man in a worn coat and assumed the worst. That kind of bias doesn't just harm individuals. It undermines trust, justice, and the very system you swore to uphold. Her words struck a chord, resonating deeply within both men. For Matthew, it was a stark reminder of why he joined law enforcement in the first place. To protect and serve, not to judge or condemn. For Bernie, it was a wake-up call, a realization that arrogance and complacency had blinded him to the humanity of others. As Agent Monroe gathered the folder and prepared to leave, she paused, turning back to address them one final time. Mr. Benson chose not to press charges against either of you. He understands that mistakes happen. But understand this, forgiveness isn't given lightly. Use this experience wisely. With that, she exited the station, leaving Matthew and Bernie alone once more. The silence between them was palpable, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Bernie spoke, his voice trembling with emotion. I feel sick, like actually sick. We treated him like garbage, Matt. Like he was nothing. Matthew nodded slowly, his jaw clenched tight. Yeah, and the worst part is, we didn't even realize we were doing it. Not really. They sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the events of the day in their minds. The way Harry had remained calm and composed throughout, never raising his voice or lashing out, even when they treated him with disdain. The cryptic warnings he'd offered, which now seemed less like riddles and more like desperate attempts to make them see the bigger picture. He knew, Matthew murmured suddenly, breaking the silence. He knew exactly who we were and what we'd do, and he let us anyway. Bernie frowned, leaning forward. What do you mean? I mean, think about it, Matthew continued, his voice rising slightly. He didn't fight back, didn't try to explain himself beyond those vague hints. He let us arrest him, lock him up, interrogate him, all because he trusted that the truth would come out eventually. Bernie stared at him, realization dawning in his eyes. And it did, in the worst possible way for us. Matthew nodded grimly. Exactly. He didn't need to prove anything to us. He already knew his worth. But we've got a lot to learn. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the station in shadows, the two officers sat in silence, grappling with the enormity of their mistake. The revelation of Harry's true identity had shattered their preconceived notions, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the world they thought they understood. Neither man felt pride in wearing the badge. Instead, they felt something far more humbling, regret. And perhaps, buried beneath the weight of that regret, the faintest glimmer of hope that they could change, grow, and become better versions of themselves. 1 week had passed since the events at the station, but for Officers Matthew Riggs and Bernie Cole, time felt both endless and fleeting. Each day dragged by under the weight of their guilt, yet it also rushed forward as they grappled with how to move on, or if they even deserved to. The memory of Harry Benson lingered like a ghost, haunting every interaction, every decision, every moment of reflection. The station buzzed with its usual hum of activity, though whispers about the incident still rippled through the ranks. Some officers teased Matthew and Bernie lightly, calling them the guys who arrested a spy. Others avoided the topic altogether, sensing the depth of their shame. But no matter how others reacted, the two men carried the burden silently, unable to shake the image of Harry's calm, knowing eyes or Agent Monroe's cutting words. Then, one quiet morning, an envelope arrived addressed to the precinct. It bore no return address, only a single stamp marked with the insignia of the United States military. The receptionist handed it to Matthew without comment, her expression unreadable. He stared at it for a long moment before reluctantly breaking the seal. Inside was a small, circular object wrapped carefully in tissue paper, a challenge coin. Its surface gleamed faintly in the fluorescent light, engraved with intricate symbols and a motto etched in bold letters: "Respect earned, never given." Beneath the coin lay a handwritten note, written in neat, deliberate script. To Officers Riggs and Cole, I hold no ill will toward you for your actions that day. In fact, I see them as an opportunity for growth, for understanding, and for change. We all make mistakes and we all carry biases. What matters is what we do after we recognize them. This coin represents more than my service. It symbolizes the values I've tried to live by throughout my life: humility, integrity, and forgiveness. Let it serve as a reminder that appearances can deceive, and true strength lies not in judgment but in empathy. May you carry this lesson forward, not just in your work but in your lives. Thank you for taking the time to learn who I am, and perhaps, in doing so, discovering something new about yourselves. Sincerely, Harold Benson. Matthew read the note twice, his throat tightening with each word. When he finally looked up, Bernie was watching him intently, waiting. Without speaking, Matthew passed the coin and note to his partner, who scanned them quickly before letting out a shaky breath. Well, Bernie said softly, his voice thick with emotion. He's classier than we deserve. Matthew nodded, cradling the coin in his palm as though it might vanish if he let go. Yeah, classier than anyone I've ever met. For several minutes, neither man spoke. They simply sat there, absorbing the weight of Harry's gesture. It wasn't just a gift. It was a lifeline, an olive branch extended to two men who had wronged him deeply. And yet, there was no trace of bitterness or condescension in his words, only grace. Later that afternoon, Matthew called a meeting with the entire precinct. Standing awkwardly at the front of the room, he held up the coin for everyone to see. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady as he recounted the story of Harry Benson. Not just the events of that fateful day, but everything they'd learned afterward. He spoke of Harry's decades of service, his countless sacrifices, and the profound humility with which he'd faced their mistreatment. And then, Matthew continued, his voice wavering slightly, he sent us this, not because he owed us anything, but because he wanted us to understand, to grow, to be better. He paused, holding the coin aloft. This isn't just a token of forgiveness. It's a challenge to treat every person we meet with respect, no matter how they look or where they come from. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms, and legends don't always announce themselves. The room fell silent, the gravity of his words sinking in. Officers exchanged glances, some nodding solemnly while others wiped away tears. For many, it was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of why they'd chosen this profession in the first place. When Matthew finished speaking, Bernie stood beside him, adding quietly, "We messed up, badly. But thanks to Mr. Benson, we have a chance to make it right. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone we serve." As the meeting adjourned, the coin made its way around the room, each officer handling it with reverence. By the end of the day, it rested back in Matthew's hand, a permanent fixture on his desk, a reminder, promise. That evening, as the sun set over Maplewood, Matthew found himself sitting alone in his car, staring at the coin once more. He thought about Harry, about the quiet dignity he'd shown, the patience he'd exhibited, and the forgiveness he'd offered so freely. And he realized something important. That forgiveness wasn't just a gift for the recipient. It was also a release for the giver. In that moment, Matthew felt a shift within himself, a subtle but undeniable change. The weight of his guilt hadn't vanished entirely, but it had transformed into something else: motivation, determination, hope. He glanced at the dashboard clock, noting the time. Then, reaching for his phone, he dialed a number he'd been avoiding for years. When the line connected, he took a deep breath and spoke. "Hey, Mom, it's me. Can we talk?" As the conversation unfolded, Matthew allowed himself to believe that redemption was possible. Not through grand gestures or heroic feats, but through small, deliberate acts of kindness and courage. Acts inspired, in part, by the quiet heroism of Harold Benson. And somewhere far away, perhaps in another town or another mission, Harry smiled faintly, knowing that his lesson had been received. This story reminds us that every person carries a history invisible to the eye. Would you have judged Harry differently if you'd met him first? Share your thoughts below. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers. With your help, we can hit this milestone together. We would appreciate your follow and celebrate with even more powerful journeys like this, right here on Embrace the Journey.